for your honor and commitment to finish up that sentence outside and not in. So parole's been around in Georgia since 1908 in some form or fashion, so it's nothing new to the state, right? In 1938, it was redesignated the State Prison and Parole Commission, so we were all one big agency. Prison and parole was all together. But in the early 40s, there was just some issues that came about on how we paroled people, and that there was no rhyme or reason. Sometimes it was who you knew. Sometimes it was how much money you may have had. I mean, to be honest, that's what happened. So in 1943, they had a landmark constitutional amendment that made us basically the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. So we had our 80th anniversary a couple years ago, so that was kind of special for us. We had a big celebration for that year. And the Constitution provided that the governor appoints our board members, and they are then ratified by the Senate. And they do 7 staggered year terms. And so why do you think it is that we do 7 staggered years?
So you don't have the same people on the board?
Yeah, the whole time,
The
we
whole
don't
time.
have to. We don't have to train 7 new people at one time, right? Because it's a big job that they do, and so it requires a lot of commitment on their part and a lot of time and commitment on our part to get them to understand, because they don't come from a parole background, right? They come from all over the place. We've had legislatures, we've had police officers, sheriffs, attorneys, DAs. So, you know, they don't really have a background in parole, so we teach them everything they need to know. And then they teach each other, so this way when a new board member comes on, they're paired with an older board member, and so that they can kind of teach them the ropes also. And so back in 1943, when we were first established, we had 3 board members, right? And then in 1973, all of a sudden, we went from like 4,000 or 5,000 inmates to 9,000 inmates, and so they gave us 2 more, right? So we still have those same 5 board members since 1973, and now, of course, there's at any one time 50 to 54,000 inmates. So our board members are a full-time board, whereas a lot of board members in other state agencies are kind of part-time. They're commissioners, they come to meetings and they do. No, our 5 board members work a full 40 plus hours a week. They are not part-time. And so on average, they cast over 20,000 votes a year. So they're working, they're a working board. And we are the only constitutional officers they are the only constitutional officers in the state of Georgia who aren't elected. So they're appointed. So this is our current board member, our current board makeup. Our chairman is David Herring. He was a former state trooper, is that? You're right. So I keep thinking highway patrol, because where I'm from, it's highway patrol, not state troopers. Our vice chair is Meg Heap, who is the former prosecutor in Chatham County. Joyette Holmes was a former prosecutor in Cobb County, along with being a magistrate judge, and our 2 newest board members, Wayne Bennett, who's been around over a year, and Mr. Markley, who just came on this last January of this year, are both retired sheriffs. So Mr. Bennett's from Glenn County and Mr. Markley is from Morgan County. All right, so I'm not gonna read this to you, but this is our mission and our vision for our agency. Our values, though, I will tell you, is ethics, integrity, equity, and innovation. So those are the things that we live by for our agency. But just know, we not only, of course, are a public safety organization, we are victim advocates, and but most importantly, we are second chance. That's what parole is, right? It's a second chance. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of go over what it does and how we achieve our mission. But don't think Shawshank Redemption, because that's what everybody thinks, right? When you have somebody who's gonna come, you're the board, and I come and I'm like, can I have parole? It doesn't happen that way in the state. Again, remember I said 50,000 inmates and 5 board members. Nobody would ever get out if we had to do that, right? It's not possible. So what happens in our state is we have this all on our website too. If you guys go to www.pap.georgia.gov, everything is on there. We are as transparent as we can be on our website. It tells you everything we do step by step. We engage in asking all interested stakeholders in the process, whether they're for parole or against parole. And you guys are stakeholders in that process, and so that's why we come and educate you, so that you can be that voice, that stakeholder for those others who are out there. And so we actively solicit input during our process from those stakeholders, all right? So basically, the whole process starts, of course, when somebody is convicted and given a prison sentence, right? We deal with people who are in prison, not on probation, until such time they may get that probation revoked and they end up in prison, right? So once they end up in prison, the Georgia Department of Corrections Offender Administration, they are what we call the timekeepers. They process that sentence. So they tell us, when does that sentence start, when does that sentence end? And then when we get it, we go in and we figure out when are these individuals parole eligible, if they are serving a parole eligible offense, right? Because there are some offenses in the state of Georgia that you are not eligible for parole. If you get 10 years for armed robbery, you're doing day for day. We cannot by law parole you, right? So if you are parole eligible, we set that parole eligibility date, which is typically 1/3 of that sentence up to 7 years. So if you get a sentence of 21 years or more, it stops at 7 years, and then you're eligible for parole. And then it's the parole board's discretion as to whether or not they're gonna actually parole you. The only right in the state of Georgia to parole is the right to be reviewed. There is no right to be released, all right? It's a discretionary process. The only right we do is we have to, by law, review your case, all right? So once we get that information from the Department of Corrections, we then solicit, or we then ask for legal investigations. So we have a whole division that does those investigations. We have people all throughout the state of Georgia that go out and obtain the information we need on what happened with those offenses. At that same time, we also are soliciting district attorney's offices for their input. That's something we do at the time of conviction. Yeah. So, and then 6 months before their parole eligibility for certain offenses, not all offenses, but for anything that's a board designated violent offense, sex offenders, residential burglary, we then solicit the judges and DAs again, and victims, if they're registered, saying, hey, this person is not being released, however, they are going to be reviewed for parole at this time, and asking them if they have any input. Yes?
So parole eligibility date is just when they're gonna be reviewed.
Exactly.
Okay, cause I work in it, and that PED, cause years ago they ain't had no PED, it just TPM or max out.
Well, everybody's always had a PED, it's just, well, except for if you're a parole revocation case. If you go back in under a parole revocation case, you're not eligible. I don't think PED mattered so much way back in the day because we were just doing cases as they came in.
Okay.
Right, because the inmate population was so less, was much less than it is now. As people came in, we reviewed them even if their PED was in the future. And then it didn't matter because they had a TPM, right? And nobody cared about the PED because now you got a TPM.
So that just determines whether they're gonna get a TPM or not.
Exactly. That's when the board is gonna look at that case and vote to say, are we going to give you a TPM either now or in the future, or are we gonna make you serve to your maximum release date? And that's the choices they make, except for life sentence cases. So on a life sentence case, what they do is they review it when they're eligible, and they make a determination, are we going to grant you parole? And if so, under what conditions? And if not, then we have to do what's called a set-off. The board has to review that case anywhere between 1 and 8 years. So they have to say, I'm gonna deny you parole right now on your life sentence, but I'm gonna review your case again in 12 months, or 36 months, 48 months, up to 8 years is the maximum set-off. They have to review your case by the 8-year mark.
How many set-offs can a person have?
As many as the board deems, because again, parole is a privilege and not a right. So, but the right they have as a lifer is to be reviewed no greater than 8 years in the future. So yes, there are life sentenced inmates who are eligible for parole who have been in prison for 50 years and been set off 25 times.
Right.
Yes.
And is that eligibility for even life still 7 years?
It's
Starts
30
at-
years.
That's 30
Now the
years.
new one is 30. It went
thought
from
so.
7 to 14 to 30. So
Right,
any
right.
crime committed after July 1 of 2006 that can get a life sentence, the 7
No,
deadly sins
30 years.
is 30 years.
Right.
There are several cases where you can get a life sentence that are still eligible in 7, and that's child molestation, sexual trafficking for sexual servitude, hijacking motor vehicle, and home invasion. Those are new those can all receive a life sentence. However, they are not one of the 7 deadly sins, so they're parole eligible in 7 years. We don't get a lot of those, but they are parole eligible in 7 years. And drug offenses. I was missing one. You can get life for drug offenses, so they're eligible in 7 years. Yes, just go to Alcoa Judicial Circuit, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
the returning citizen is not aware of their PED date though, right?
Yes, they are. As
Oh,
soon as
okay.
we set it, it goes to the Department of Corrections.
Okay.
And trust me, they will ask their
Yes.
counselor, and the counselor will
So
look it up
counselor
for
knows
them.
all these dates, okay?
Yes,
They
it
get
is.
a letter, don't they?
No, not for parole eligibility, for their tentative parole month, yes.
Yeah, for that.
Oh.
But it does go to the Department of Corrections system so they can look, because a lot of the programming that the Department of Corrections does, if a person does not have a TPM yet, is based then on their parole eligibility date, especially
Like,
if it's several years in the
they
future.
might not be there in time to finish a program, and so
Exactly.
they go by that date to make sure that
Yeah.
they're eligible.
And that's where those pick points come in at.
The
they
pick
talk
points will
about.
come in off of a TPM, not their PED.
Okay.
Yes. You had a question in the back real quick, or no? Okay. All right. So, once we solicit more, then again, parole eligibility is actually set by state statute, which says we have to review a case who's eligible within 9 months on those short sentence cases up to 7 years. So we didn't just make that up. But it's based on 7 years because, again, prior to 1995, life sentences were eligible for parole in 7 years, right? So it wouldn't make sense if you got a 30-year sentence that you'd be eligible in 10 years, but you got a life sentence and you'd be eligible in 7. So that's why they capped that PED at 7 years, and we've just never changed it. And I don't think it'll ever change. So once we have that and we get all the information, then one of our hearing examiners takes that case and they prepare it for the board for a vote. And so after they vote on the case, then what all of the offenders are looking for is that TPM, right? So if the board votes to give them a TPM, then they will then get that letter with their grid sheet, right? Because they all want the grid sheet so that they can see how we scored them out. And to see if we made any mistakes. We're human, we make mistakes. So they are welcome to, if they believe there's something on their grid sheet that's wrong, to write us to say, hey, this isn't correct. And if we're wrong, we will send it back to the board and then send them a letter saying, we've made the adjustments and you'll get a new notification.
Have this always been established?
Yes.
Because I remember when I was incarcerated, I never got any letter.
Yeah,
I never
when-
got a
well,
grid sheet.
if when the board votes, at the time they vote, if they vote to parole you now or within 90 days, you won't get one. Because
Okay.
we're gonna start the process. There's
Okay.
no sense in notifying
All
you
right.
if we're gonna turn around and start the out process at that time.
Yeah, I just wonder.
Otherwise-
it was in the '90s, so I was
Yeah,
just
well,
trying to
heck,
figure
I
out.
don't,
Yeah.
I didn't start voting for the
Maybe they
board.
didn't do it back then.
I just, no, you know what though, what happened, this is not a lie. Everything went through snail mail, right?
Yeah.
So God knows what happened to half the
You can
stuff we
say that
sent.
again.
Now everything is electronic. It
Electronic,
literally
yeah.
goes to them. As soon as we hit confirm and send notification, it
Yeah.
shows up within seconds to the Department of Corrections computer. So that's cut down on a lot of that, I never got it. Which we all know
Good,
it
yeah.
happened. I mean, when I first started here 25 years ago, and some people started longer than that ago, we know. We know it didn't happen, but that's why we literally have a 10-day delay
Yeah.
also. So when the board makes a decision on a TPM, we send those notifications out, and then we wait 10 days before it gets populated on our website for anybody else to see, because
Oh,
we want the offenders to get the information first.
Yeah.
Right? And so even though now it's an instant, we don't know how long it takes the counselors to get them the letter.
Exactly.
So we still wait 10 days before
Okay.
anybody else can see the
awesome.
decision.
Yeah.
And then, so once that's done and all is good, on the serious violent felons, which is about 95% life sentenced inmates, right? We do still have some that are non-life sentenced that are in prison for those. We also send out, if the board decides to grant parole, we send what we call a 90-day notification to the judges and the DAs and to the offender, letting them know the board has tentatively granted you parole, but we have to wait 90 days to see if there's any outside stakeholders' input that can come in. And so again, victims are notified of that. And then if there's registered victims in any offense, they're notified when there's a board decision.
I just had a young lady, that paroled out and, for big old homicide.
Mhm.
And the victim says she wasn't notified.
Then she would not have been registered.
Okay, because, so the victim had to register,
Has to register. to
because I think they
notify.
said she didn't get the,
So what
something.
happens sometimes is, and there is a little bit of a breakdown, and our victim services is working with, every county has their own victim advocates when people are going to court. right? And so if you're a victim of a crime and you're working with DeKalb County Victims, Victim Services, before anything goes to court, once that offender is sentenced and goes to the Department of Corrections, there's kind of sometimes a lag in the handoff. The victim advocates in the counties need to make sure that they tell that victim not that they no longer have a stake in it, they have to tell them to register with our Office of Victim Services. Our Office of Victim Services works for Parole, they work for the Department of Community Supervision, and they work for the Georgia Department of Corrections. So all three agencies have people, they're housed in our offices, but all three agencies have employees that work in there.
Do that, yeah.
And so, once they're registered with that office, then they're registered with all three. But if they're only registered with the county and they never get registered with our office, then fortunately, they're not gonna get notified.
Now, do they have a say in whether this person get parole or not?
They can have a say, but the board still has the ultimate, so if you're a victim of a crime, you would want to be able to have an input, and they do, and the board takes that, but they also take input on, we call it, I say we're neutral, we tell the board good, bad, and ugly. We tell them the good stuff they've done in prison, the bad stuff they've done in prison. We tell them they've got letters of support from friends and family and the community. And we also tell them if there's victim input or DA or judges or sheriff's input also. So we are fact finders. We take everything and send it to the board. So, you've got 5 board members, so it depends on their values and morals and judgments on what may weigh more heavily on their minds. But I can tell you, yes, victims do have a good, have an input, as well they should, right? And so they take all of that into consideration when they make their decisions. And then at the end, if we do decide to grant you a TPM, that's kind of where the pick will come into play, right? So you come up you're getting close to that TPM, but you've earned 12 pick points. If your TPM is 2 years in the future and you earn 12 pick points, you can get out in 12 months and not 24 months. And even if the board decides to max you, they can still allow pick. And so some people don't understand that, and they get that max decision and then they start nutting up, right? All of a sudden you look, they don't realize they can still get pick. And so they earn all these pick points, but so we go to look at it and we're like, oh, well, you got 12 pick points, but you got 35 DRs, right? So we've got to weigh that too, and so then we send those cases to the board to say, hey, you afforded this individual pick, but they've also done this on the other side. And so we do try to get the word out, and so if you are working with individuals who are currently incarcerated, except lifers, because they can't earn pick, because they never get a TPM per se, is to encourage them that even if you get that max vote, you still may be pick eligible. And so don't do stupid things, because you can still get out earlier than your maximum release date.
So they don't have to have a TPM, they can get the max out, they can continue the program.
They can still earn pick, and they can still get out earlier. They would just then be on parole for however many months they get. And so some of them don't realize that, because several years ago, max outs, I think it was prior to 2011, max outs did not earn pick. But since 2011, they can.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the time of final review, we're looking for the pick. We're looking to see what they've done while they've been in prison, right? Have they acted up? Have they gotten delinquent reports? We also at that point look for program completions. If the board says you should do RSAT or Motivation for Change, have you completed those programs? And if you haven't, why? If it's through no fault of your own because the facility you're in doesn't offer it, we're not gonna ding you for that. That's not your fault.
No.
But if you enter it and get kicked out or voluntarily leave those programs, then we're gonna look at that. Are they ready to be released if they can't complete some of the programming that we've offered? Are they getting positive drug screens in prison? Should we let them out? So we look at all of those things. And then we're looking at whether or not there are registered victims, are there DA protests, because we're gonna notify them by law that this person may be getting out, and to see if they have anything additional that they want to say. And if everything goes well and we set a release date, again, by law, we do what's called a 72-hour notification. Judges, DAs, sheriffs, victims all get a notification at least 3 days prior to that set release date to let them know where they're gonna be living and what day they're gonna be getting out. And again, at that point, they can also contact us. And we've had people contact us the day before somebody's gonna be released, because this is the first time, for whatever reason, they're now hearing from us. And so, we have to take that into consideration.
What happens
We usually postpone the release date so
Okay.
that we can gather some more information, and then we send that case to the board and have them decide whether or not that person's gonna still continue to be released or not.
That could.
And
The day before, this could
It
happen.
can happen, yes.
This-
Also, what can happen is the morning of, they
Oh,
think,
man.
they're like, I'm getting out today, you can't touch me.
Oh, yeah.
And they do something stupid, guess what, that's a phone call. There's nothing in the rules that say we gotta release you at 8 AM. So if you do
yeah.
something at 7:30, they can pick up the
Temporary
phone and
parole.
call us and say, no,
Seen it
and we'll
happen.
stop it right then and there.
Yeah.
Until they actually walk out the door, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, I believe it.
I seen it
I
happen.
believe it.
I
All
see
the
people,
time.
I see people's TPM get snatched all the time.
Yeah,
Yep.
and sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes it gets snatched because we get new information or an additional sentence. Sometimes it gets snatched because
They've
think
been doing
the
it.
night
I watched the
before.
guy walking out, was fixing to walk out the gate,
Yeah,
and they snatched him back.
Yeah.
Come back.
Called and had it pulled.
because they realized he did something stupid and somebody
No, he
was
so,
like,
he
yeah.
was so high
Wow.
when he was about to leave.
Yeah,
Thought he
those
was
strips
partying the night
celebration
before he
before
left.
he got
Yeah.
Hey, scripture, right now, scripture the
Party
beta
to you on the
DOC
other
because
side.
they can't even
Yeah.
test for them. All they know is the person sitting in the chair and all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
like nodding off and it's like,
Strips.
yeah. And you're right, that happens,
That's crazy.
we get phone calls at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, we went by, he's in the release cell, he is ready to go, and they go by and he's out of it, or he decided they opened the door to do something and he like shoves them out the way, I'm free. No, sir, you're not. Or
Not yet.
So.
Be careful.
Yeah, so they can be snatched at the 11th hour. But if not, and they do well, which is what we want, right? Because we're in
Right,
second
yeah.
chance business, they actually step out the door, right?
Woo-hoo.
Okay, so this is kind of how it goes here. So you got John Doe was convicted of robbery February of last year. He got 15 years, but he got 10 years to serve. So 10 years is 120 months, right? 1/3 of that is 40 months. That's his parole eligibility. So DOC computed his time, because again, they're the timekeepers, not us. And so his 1/3 eligibility based on his begin date of February. So if you add 40 months to that, comes out to June 1st of 2027. So he is going to serve at least those 40 months, right? Especially because it's a robbery charge, right? Can we release somebody before their parole eligibility date? Yes. However, we do have to do what's called a 1/3 notification, and we have to notify the DAs that we're planning on letting this person go prior to their 1/3 to see if they have an issue with it. Alright, so of course, when this person first comes in, we get all of the investigations and stuff like that, and we do that on anybody. We do that on people who aren't even parole eligible, because what happens is, they get convicted of armed robbery and they get a 20-year sentence, but 5 years into it, they end up back in court, and then they end up taking a plea to maybe robbery. They reduce it. Well, now they're parole eligible, and they're already 5 years after their sentence, and then we would be scrambling to try and get those investigations, right? So we get investigations on everybody as soon as they're convicted, and if they are never parole eligible, it just sits there.
You have it,
But at
just in
least
case
we
you
have
need
it,
it, yeah.
just in case, exactly. So we usually have all of this stuff done within 90 to 120 days of them being convicted. We get all that information as soon as possible while it's fresh and it's easily accessible, because we've tried to obtain police reports from Fulton and DeKalb County 10 and 15 years later. It's like pulling teeth. That's if they can find it, So we do everything pretty quickly. So because this is one of our board designated violent offenses, robbery is, 6 months prior to that parole eligibility date, we're gonna send electronically what we call a secondary solicitation to the judge and DA. We now also send them to public defenders. So in case the public defender has any input, 40 months later, they can also send it to us. But this happens 6 months prior to that June of 27 date, so that would be December of 26. We send those out, and then we literally hold the case for 60 days. That case will go nowhere because we want to give people time to send that information in to us. And so after the 60 days, then the case will be available for one of our hearing examiners to grab it out of the queue and then prepare it to the board. So they use, of course, all the legal investigations, any input that we've received. We use our guidelines risk assessment. We look at the Department of Corrections. We have full access to their computer, so we can see in the 40 months that he's been in there, what programs has he done? How many DRs has he received? Is he receiving mental health treatment? Is he an STG? You know, that's a big one nowadays. You know, are you a validated gang member? Right now, that's for men only because there hasn't been enough data on female gang members. But they have grown by 300% in the Georgia Department of Corrections. So eventually, I have a feeling we'll end up with that. But as of right now, it's not. So this is all on our website, but this is kind of a snapshot of our crime severity levels, 1 through 8, and then of course our life sentence cases. So what our hearing examiners do is if you are, say you're convicted of trafficking and it's 28 grams. So trafficking cocaine and meth, less than 200 grams, so 28 to 199 is a level 5 offense. So then we come here, so he is, the risk level is a 5. And then we use this here to come up with whether or not they're a low, medium, or high risk to reoffend. So we revalidated our guidelines. We do it every 5 years. So we just revalidated in 2023. And so what we came up with is, are they currently in prison for a property offense? Because we know people who have property offenses commit them over and over, right? Bad checks, shoplifting, burglary.
Right.
So it's not aggravated assaults, it's not the violent crimes, it's the property crimes that they commit. Were they currently on parole or probation at the time they came to prison? How many felony arrest cycles and how many misdemeanor arrest cycles? And we use arrests and not convictions because what this is predicative of is, will they, upon release from prison, be arrested for a new felony within 3 years of release? And so that's why we use arrest, because that's what this is going to tell us. How likely are you, upon release, to be arrested for a new felony within 3 years?
So when they're a validated gang member, are they already automatically considered high risk?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It kind of depends on the other factors.
Okay.
Again, for males, it's, are you a gang member? One of the biggest ones that makes you a lower risk is how old you are when you enter prison this time. Because we all know the older you are when you go in, the less likely you are to commit a crime when released.
Okay.
So what it makes them a high risk is when you got these 20-somethings coming into prison and they're a validated gang member, right? That starts you at least a medium, if not a max right there, just given your age and are you a validated gang member. So what happened this time though, one of the new ones was for females only, do you have a prior felony drug arrest? And because what the science showed on the individuals that were studied previously was those females who had prior felony drug arrests, when they got out, unfortunately were more likely to be arrested within 3 years for another felony. Whether or not that's a drug arrest or whether or not a lot of times that's those property offenses because of drug use, right? So what we do is we figure out, are you a low, medium, or high risk to reoffend? This is a level 5 offense. So say you're a medium risk to reoffend. The recommendation to the board is that you serve 42 months of that 10-year sentence with a range of 34 to 48. Well, we all know they have to serve at least 40 months, right? So when they go to the board, if the board agrees with this 42, they're not gonna get a grid sheet, right? Because they've already served 40.
Right.
The board is saying they could get out 2 more months. So we just start that parole process without them being notified. But however, if they end up as a high risk and say the board votes for 60 months, then they've only served 40, they're gonna get a grid sheet with what the board's
20 months.
decision was and how they can appeal that decision if they think there's a mistake.
Cool.
All right, so basically, like I was saying, it's not like Shawshank. Once we hit complete, we take all that information and we send it to the board. It just randomly goes to the board member. So you may be board member, that may be your first vote. So you open it up, you see it, you read it, you cast your vote. As soon as you hit complete, it could go back there to this board member. As soon as he hits complete, it could come up here. If the first 3 votes are the same, then we're done, right? You all voted 60 months. That's what the decision is, it goes. Now, all 3 of you, if you are the 3 granting board members, at least 2 of the 3 of you have to decide on preconditions and special conditions. So, you know, if you are the only one who says they need substance abuse on the outside and the other 2 don't, they don't get it. Because it has to be at least 2 out of the 3 granting members for any conditions to be in place. But once we have it, then, and it's established, we let the offender know, and then we let any registered victims know what the decision is. And then we kind of talked about what happens when there's a TPM. 3 months prior to the TPM or the projected PIC date, if they have PIC, then we get that case again to review it, to make sure that they've done what we've asked, see what the residence plan is, and then send out those 72-hour notifications. And then again, hopefully, they're out the door. Yes?
First of all, you did excellent.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Excellent.
Hopefully I didn't talk too fast, because I really want you to get to the part.
I have a lady, she's 5 months past her TPM.
Which means she probably needs a residence plan to be verified, and we don't have one, or there may be a class that the board says we're not gonna waive, and we have to do that. But if you give me her name and GDC number, I'll be happy to look it up for you and see. All right. So this is just a little bit of impact, some numbers, since everybody likes numbers. In fiscal year 24, which was June of 23 to July of 24, we paroled 5,443 people. During that same fiscal year, there was at least 22,408 people on parole supervision. So we saved the state of Georgia $343 million in releasing people from prison, because it costs $68.51 to house a healthy inmate per day versus $2.89 of parole supervision. And like I said, that's healthy. A sick inmate can cost $100,000 a year or more.
Yeah.
So anyways, we also have a 72% parole success completion rate, thanks to this gentleman. And her people.
So I do have a question about the
yes.
unhealthy. Do you consider them more than you would a healthy person?
We can, if the
Okay.
Department of Corrections says, especially if they can't really treat them. It's not always about money, because again,
Yeah.
we still have to take public safety into consideration.
Yeah.
But if you have an inmate who is, within 6 months of maybe dying, and they need maybe hospice care or something like that, then the prisons can ask us to reevaluate somebody based on their medical condition.
Well, I seen a young lady at Lee Arundel, they didn't release her. She was in her final stage, and
And again, sometimes there's just other reasons why we can't.
So
but-
if a person's, I'm just trying to understand, if a person's like incapable of doing anything,
Mhm.
why would they not want them to go and be with their family versus in the infirmary at the prison?
And again, it's a tricky situation, because they may be, but there still also may be victims. There still may also be other factors that play into that. And sometimes the Department of Corrections doesn't let us. You know what I'm
They
saying?
don't let you know.
We try to educate them to let them know, if you have people in your facilities who are not a threat, who do have these medical issues, let us know. Again, all we can do is ask. Our board may do it, they may not, but we do have we do release quite a few people a year on what we call a medical reprieve.
Yes.
So that, so that they can die with dignity, or die with family, or even die in a nursing home versus in a state prison, even if they don't have family.
Right.
And again, it takes the burden off of us taxpayers.
Yeah.
Because they end up on Medicare or Medicaid, and then it goes to the federal government to pay.
And then sometimes it's a residence issue too, because
Yes.
sometimes the family members confidentially
Yeah.
don't want
Them to
Or
come
can't take
home.
care of them. They may want them all day long, but then when we go to explaining that this is the kind of care they may need, they can't provide it, and we're
Right.
not gonna. That's a great point, Jenna, thank you. They're not gonna, and we do work with a lot of nursing homes, but sometimes they try to do the paperwork, and they can't get the funding, and nursing homes are a business, they can't just take everybody, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
alright.
That's a
So
good
this
way to
is-
look at it.
yeah,
Gives
and-
me a
but we
better
do
understanding
try.
of that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so this is just, a little thing that our board, the responsibility of our board is to make those informed, scientific, data-driven decisions, to enhance public safety for all of us, because again, and that goes for individuals who are out and doing what they're supposed to do. We don't want somebody to come behind them and make them a victimizer. Alright, so this will be the next one.
That was awesome.
Yes.
Great, very informative.
Love it.
Good morning, everyone. First I want to apologize. I'm not in professional attire because I came from a conference and we were not supposed to get released until 12. So Lisa was going to cover my part graciously. But when we got released early, I just couldn't let her come out here and do it. And I was like, I just have to do it.
You
The way that I am, I'm sorry I have on jeans.
It's okay.
So Lisa is pre-release division, and Jenna and I are post-release. Jenna James is our deputy director of post-release. She's been in post-release how long?
A long time.
A long time.
Longer than
when Lisa
25
said
years.
some people have been here longer than 25 years, she was implying. Well, I'm proud to say this is my 35th year.
Go ahead.
Wow.
All
I don't
right.
know how much longer I will be here.
I've been there now.
Wow.
But I've probably been at the parole board longer than some people in this class have been alive. But
You
anyway,
sure don't.
I look good. I moved from pre-release to post-release just in December of last year. So Jenna is definitely here to support me in case there's a question that comes up I don't know. But we pretty much facilitate those who are have been released on parole supervision, and then so we facilitate the violation process, but we also facilitate the rehabilitation process because those out on parole who are performing exceptionally can request that the board commute their sentence to time served. And there's a process, there's some criteria into place, but they can request that they get their sentence, and the board is the sole authority who can commute a sentence to time served. So, you know, that's on the rehabilitation end is positive. And then there's a pardon process. Does anybody know what rights you lose when you get convicted of a felony?
Firearms voting.
Voting,
And,
firearms voting,
And can't be like a city council.
the right
can't
to
serve
run
office.
for a whole
Office,
public
yeah.
office.
It's more.
Oh.
More.
You can't. Well, never mind. That's not a right.
Certain jobs.
Well, we'll talk about that. It's beneficial to get it. And the right to act as a notary.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
yeah, all of those rights, except the right to vote is automatically restored when you complete all of your sentences. People just need to know to go to the registrar's office and re-register. But that's what rights can be restored by the parole board.
So even after, so is that a convicted felon or people that's on parole? For like notary and stuff like that?
But that's a convicted felon.
So can that get restored?
Yeah, the parole board can restore your rights, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we're gonna talk about it in detail.
Okay.
There's one misdemeanor though that will cause you also to lose your right to bear firearms. Does anybody know that right?
Domestic violence.
Domestic violence.
Okay.
So that would be an exception, and we're gonna talk about some other exceptions. But we have a unit within post-release called the Pardon Administration Unit, and they process all of our pardon applications.
They so long. I'm trying to
It
get through
is
mine.
long. We're gonna go through it.
Can you help me?
We're gonna get to that at the end. Are you working on a paper application?
I'm working online. Yeah, working.
Oh,
on
you're
it.
online,
Yeah.
good, because we're gonna talk about that
Okay,
transition
yeah.
at the end. It is a lot, and I should say up front, the process right now takes 6 to 9 months. But I can explain some of that because, you know, once they process, they have to screen the application, you know, determine if the person is really eligible. Then they have to request any information that is not provided initially, and the majority of people do not provide all the
Yeah, that's what
correct
I'm trying to do,
information
make sure I
initially.
have everything.
So we give them we've cut that down from 60 to 30 days to get that information in. And once it leaves us, once it's screened and ready to go, it goes 2 places. It goes to the Office of Victim Services because the law requires us to notify the victim if a person applies for a pardon, and it also goes to an investigations unit. And they're doing all the investigations for the entire agency, Lisa's side of the investigations and our side of the investigation. So we give them another 2 months to complete.
So what if there's no victims involved in your case?
Then the Office of Victim Services will notify us, close out their part of it so that it can keep moving.
Oh.
So, but we have to wait for that notification.
But it'll
from
still be the same amount of time that they'll review.
It just depends on when they get to it, but to be
Okay.
honest, they're very, very busy, and a
Yeah.
lot of time they don't get to it until the deadline. So
Okay.
that's, some of the time that it takes, but then once it goes to the board, it, just like Lisa's case is, has to have a majority vote. And, this board member might take a month to determine, whether they will or will not, and it goes to another board member. So once we get our part of it done, still, then we really have no control over how long it will take the board
So
to make a decision.
it goes, we have to wait for one board member and then it goes one at a time?
One at a time
Okay.
until a majority vote is
Okay.
achieved.
Sounds good.
Yes, so that can take a while. But, within our capability is to restore rights for Georgia convictions, and we'll talk about it later. We also can have some limited ability to restore some rights for a person with a felony conviction in another state, and we're gonna go over that in detail. Federal offenses, we're gonna talk about as well. We just have limited ability to restore some rights, for federal offenses. So we've already talked about the rights that they lose, for the felony conviction and the misdemeanors. For those who have a first offender conviction that they successfully complete, no rights are lost. We still get the applications, but we inform them, hey, if you have a successful completion, then you have not lost any rights. And we've already talked about the board is the only authority who can restore those rights. Okay, what does a pardon do? A pardon is it's a official forgiveness from the state, and it goes on the individual's criminal history. So outside the offense that is pardoned, it says this person is fully rehabilitated and a law-abiding citizen for this offense and any offense prior to it. So now if someone were to get another felony offense after they got the pardon,
That clearly
then they would invalidate, their status as being pardoned. And we talked about restoration of civil and political rights, then you could then run for our whole political office. Though there are some requirements to run for public office, that are, I think the law requires that you have 10 years since your conviction, which we only require, and we're gonna talk about the time frames, but 5 years. So a lot of people think that if they get that pardon, that will eliminate that requirement, but it doesn't, so.
Well, I'm running for office.
Well, all right,
Got my
more
vote.
power to you.
Oh, wait.
And,
City
of course, we talked about, with the restoration of firearm rights, you then can legally possess a firearm, as well.
Alexis had a question about firearms. Ooh.
Well, yeah, I had a conditional discharge, so that was finished in December. So my firearm rights, that's already, do I have the firearm rights?
You have to apply to
Okay.
the parole board for your right to bear firearms, and you have to wait for 5 years
Okay,
after your sentence, and we're gonna talk about that. But first, we're gonna talk about, federal convictions. So, the state of Georgia, there's no state that can pardon a federal offense. In order to get the federal offense pardon, you have to, request a presidential pardon, which goes through the, Department of Justice. And also, there's a law that says a person with a federal conviction cannot possess a firearm.
Right.
So for that reason, we can't consider it.
Ever.
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 Right.
Ever. We
Even
cannot.
if,
We
I'm sorry.
cannot.
Even if you get the president to, I guess, is that a pardon?
If you get, if you only have the federal offense and you get the presidential pardon, then that negates the need to have, because if you got the federal, that will restore.
Okay, so,
Yes, but and then if you had a state, now people have dual types of convictions, but, we could grant, if you had a state of Georgia offense, but you also had a federal offense. On the state of Georgia offense, we could grant a pardon, but we could not grant a firearm. That could only be restored, through a presidential pardon. And then there's one other scenario, and I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with this slide presentation, it's been changed, but, I can't remember where it is on here, but for a person dishonorably discharged from the military, there is also federal law that says that person cannot, possess a firearm, so. you know,
Is
we would
that
not be-
automatic?
That's automatic.
Once they get discharged, they're not supposed,
Dishonorably.
dishonorably, they're not
Dishonorably.
supposed to have a gun ever.
Discharged.
Ever.
They're not.
I didn't know that.
And there are a lot of different classifications of discharge.
Right.
It only applies to dishonorably discharged. There are other non-favorable discharges, but this only applies to dishonorable. Yes, ma'am.
And there's no way to restore that and get that back.
I don't know
You gotta
if you
go
can
through
then
the-
apply for a federal,
Probably.
pardon. But I'm thinking no that there is, and I was thinking about that on the way over here, because it is not a conviction, there probably is no way, to legally possess.
If we're talking about for the dishonorable discharge, in the military,
Yes.
you have to go through the, well, depending on what branch you with, they all have review boards. You have to write letters. I don't have a dishonorable discharge, but I've been writing them for 10 years. I haven't got anything back. You can't call them, you have to mail them, you have to mail letters, you have to get them notarized, and it's like a weight gain. But I got general honorable conditions. I'm just trying to get back my college money. That's it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Difficult
it's-
dealing
it's-
with the
it's
feds.
one
I
of
would
those
think
things.
the
Either,
numbers.
they tell you that you can reach out to your Secretary of State or your governor, and they can help you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it gets a little bit complicated. So say a person has a conviction, a felony conviction in Tennessee, and they've now moved to Georgia, and they want their rights back in Georgia. So the Georgia Parole Board can consider their application not to pardon the Tennessee offense, because we cannot pardon anybody else's, but we can grant a civil and political with firearms, which would allow that person in the state of Georgia only
Right.
to possess their firearm
Don't you
and to have
take
those
that nowhere
other
else.
You take it across state
restoration
line.
of those other civil. But you're right, because if you step out of the state of Georgia, then
You
you're
in
subject
trouble.
Then it's a federal
to
crime, right?
whatever. I don't know if it's a federal crime, but you're subject to whatever laws that
that
state
state.
has regarding felons in possession of weapons. So we recommend that you don't, if you get granted for firearms in Georgia, that you stick to Georgia using your firearm. And this is the slide I was looking for on the military discharge. So we, because we would be conflicting ourselves with federal law, so we just don't even, we just send those back as ineligible. Okay, there are two types of pardon applications. There's the pardon for a general offense, and then there's a sex offender. And like I said, the time frame criteria are to reapply to make your initial application is 5 years for a pardon. Civil and political rights you can apply for 2 years after you've completed your sentence. And we'll talk about that criteria, but for a pardon, you have to wait 5 years. And then for a sex offender pardon, it's 10 years. We'll talk about the specifics for sex offender. They're much more stringent because of what it says here. If the board provide the pardon to a sex offender, that removes their requirement to register on the sex offender registry. So you can imagine they are very particular about these
Yeah, I would
particular
imagine so.
applications.
Yeah, with that going, it leaves a vulnerable group of people, cause now they don't have that on their record.
The sex offender registry, as long as you're required to register, you have to continue to register. You can go back to the court though, and I've seen some. People go back to the court and get that requirement removed, and if they do that, they just have to verify that for us, and then they fall back to the general type of application requirement. Okay, so these are some of the criteria for a general pardon. You must have completed all sentences and live a law-abiding life at least 5 years prior to applying. And that law-abiding life means no contact with law enforcement. No arrests that were dismissed, no contact with law enforcement.
Not even a traffic
No
ticket.
pending, traffic, there's an exception for traffic charges. You must have no pending charges, and all fines must be paid. Now
So-
restitution, it might be can continue to be ongoing, but all fines must be paid.
So that's why I've waited so many years, because I've always seen that all fines must be paid. And in my case, I was on parole and probation. My probation ran out before I got done my parole. And so when I got to the parole office, they were like, your time expired. You can't pay that fine because your sentence
But
is
your
over.
case was closed.
Yeah.
Okay, so if your probation case was closed by the court as
Okay.
completed, then we consider that fine to be closed
Okay,
as
okay.
well.
So that's always been my concern.
Okay. I'm gonna give you all a website too, where you can
Okay.
always write us and
Okay.
ask us questions if you have additional questions
Okay.
about specific situations, so you can get some clarity
Okay.
and know whether
Thank
you're
you.
eligible or not. If you do, I wanna say this too, if you do apply and get denied, you can reapply in 2 years. So, and there's no limit of number
How
of
many
times
times you
that
can
you can apply, yes. When we talk about pending charges, when you apply, we're gonna request a copy of your criminal history. And I don't know if you all are familiar with looking at the criminal history
Mhm.
report, but sometime if you have an old or pending charge that there's no disposition of, we know you didn't get convicted of it because you're
Mhm.
walking around, but we consider that to be an open charge.
Open
And the board will not consider, it's on the criminal history, it shows a time expired restriction. We call them TERs. So what we require is that you go, if you have something on there, an arrest from 1999 and nobody ever entered a disposition, we send you back to that jurisdiction so that they can enter the
Right,
disposition date. Or at least, a lot of times they don't have the records, but at least provide you something on letterhead
Right.
to say that this charge is closed, this person is not gonna be prosecuted for this charge. Just so that we can ensure that there's nothing open out there.
So I'm gonna submit a GCIC report with my pardon or NCIC.
You're gonna submit a GCIC, we're gonna run an NCIC.
Okay, you said.
Yeah. Okay, here we are back to sex offenders, so we double the time requirement, the person must have 10 years. We also require a psychosexual evaluation that was completed within 30 days, a disclosure polygraph, completed within 30 days, and a copy of your most recent, sex offender review board risk level. For the psychosexual and the disclosure polygraph, we have approved providers, and you have to use one of our approved providers. They're listed on our website.
Question.
Yes.
So the last one says, copy of the review board's risk level.
Yes.
Isn't that only done like once, or is it done?
You can contact them and request, and Lisa might know a little better.
Yeah.
The time frame they get those completed it takes a
about
while.
79,000 behind. They honestly, it's honestly very rare that sex offenders actually even get leveled.
Mhm.
They do
Yeah, I
some
heard
while
that
they're
too.
incarcerated, but they say it's easier for them to do them once they're out of custody. So if they're on parole or probation, they may get leveled then. If they have not been leveled, like Kim said, they have to contact SOAR to
And
get
ask them to
Okay.
provide that for them. And we've had people who've been able to get what they needed, so. Okay, so there are some exceptions, on the type of, like we said, if you get convicted of a misdemeanor, other than the family violence, you don't lose any rights. So, a pardon really doesn't serve any purpose. But for some exceptions, the board will consider granting, and we're gonna talk about that. And then the, time requirement, and this goes to the first time that you apply only. If you can prove that waiting either the 2-year time frame or the 5-year time frame is going to delay you doing something critical like working in your preferred field, making money so that you can be law abiding. If you can document that, then the board may make an exception. But generally, we see this when people are trying to get a particular job or a particular promotion, and they can document that they were not hired because of their criminal history, or they can get someone at that employer to say, I would consider this hiring this person if they had a pardon, or what I've seen is we would consider promoting this person if they had a, and then some fields are very particular. You might get a job there, but you know, there are no advancement opportunities, or you might get the job temporarily while you attempt to get a pardon. So in those situations, the board can make an exception. As far as the particular type of offenses, I think that is my next slide. Yes, there are some situations, people trying to apply to be a foster care provider, or you know, for different education level, for different licenses, type of professional licenses. Truck drivers driving into Canada, you know, you can't enter the country if you don't have a pardon. So we're familiar with these, and we will make some exceptions for misdemeanors on these particular reasons. You just have to have the documents to support, you know, why the exception is needed.
You said truck drivers can't go to Canada, out of
No,
country?
you can't drive into Canada without a
Canada's
pardon.
strict, buddy.
That's Canada won't let you, if you have a even as a regular person, if you have a DUI, say you just wanna go visit Canada, and you actually did 10 years ago, you are not going to Canada.
So I couldn't go because I'm a convicted felon, I couldn't visit.
No.
Until you
I knew
get
that.
pardoned. Wow.
It's good to know that,
Yeah,
right?
I
That just
never
save
knew
a lot
that.
of embarrassment.
Yeah, with a,
You get there.
Canada don't play.
I don't know how it acts. I don't know if when you get there, they run your criminal history or.
yeah, you gotta be on a database
Won't
somewhere.
let
your
you in?
passport.
Oh my
Okay.
God, that's embarrassing.
How come,
It's good to know.
how come we don't do
Details
that?
like that.
Here I'm talking about moving to Canada. Yeah, okay.
Now, we're
That's
on to
right.
our new, in January, you guys, in January of 2024, we finally transitioned, we were the last paper process for the parole board, and we finally transitioned to an online, process. But you still have to fill out all of the information. Some people are having a little bit of trouble with the online, mostly people who are not familiar with computers, anyway, but draw a hard line, you gotta get it in.
That's right.
Or you have to get somebody to apply for you. And this is just saying that we moved to the online process. And we're hoping, when you were saying it takes so long, we're hoping with the online process, will speed up because we're able to communicate more quickly. Whereas we were using snail mail, you know, we gotta allow a few days for it to get to the person. Then we were giving the person a long time to mail it back to us, and so that was bogging down the process. But now, what the system does is ask you for an email address. Once you provide an email address, then it will let you set up a password.
It was very easy to create an account.
Okay,
Just
good.
remembering all my, you know, cause it's been
It takes a
a
while. to
long
recall
time since I
all of that.
was incarcerated, so I gotta
You
dig up
gotta
some
think
stuff
about it,
and,
yes,
and go
yes.
back all those addresses,
Mhm.
you know, cause they want 10 years, and so it's just, getting all my ducks in a row.
Okay.
Making
You can
sure
save
that
it
I
for
have-
a person though
yeah, I
who
can
is
save
not
it.
computer savvy, or a person who is elected to have an attorney, or another entity.
David said he gonna do.
I always just give this warning, with the attorneys, they charge a lot. I'm not trying to discourage you, but I'm just saying, just because an attorney presented it does not improve your chances of being granted a pardon
Right.
or a restoration of firearm, and they charge a lot of money.
That's
Thousands of
good
dollars
information though.
to pull together the information that you can pull together yourself. Now, there are some entities, like I know there's the Georgia Justice Project,
Right.
and I think they're either free or on a sliding scale, because
Yeah,
it
they're
is
limited.
intimidating when you don't know, you know, what all we're requesting. I think they will assist people. They're in Middle Georgia, but there gotta be other organizations out there who
They
do the
came
same.
yesterday.
Yeah, they
and
came
They got
yesterday.
first
Oh, okay.
Friday, so I signed up for that first
Yeah.
Friday.
Okay,
So that
okay,
if
and
I am granted a pardon, I could get my record restricted.
you can apply to get your record restricted.
Apply.
That's a new law that went into effect
Yeah.
either 2 to 3 years ago, that if you get a pardon, you can apply to have your record restricted. And I know somebody, I'm not gonna touch on that because somebody I think is gonna talk to you all. People think if your record is restricted, that it's expunged, and it's not expunged.
'Cause
It's
expungement doesn't
restricted,
exist.
So you all read. But I was just gonna say, so attorneys can use this to apply for pardons for multiple clients, and we've explained to they reach out and we tell them how to get in the system to go in between. But I just wanted to say, you know, you might wanna seriously consider to pay thousands of dollars. You know, when you can, we have our website available to ask questions, and our staff is very friendly and very knowledgeable, and they will be glad to give you direction or guidance on anything that we are requesting from you. So it can be done, but it has to be done online.
So, cause it asks questions like, you know, if you've been divorced, so am I uploading my divorce decree, or?
Your documents, I'll show you at the end, yes.
Okay.
It shows you what it's gonna show you, and we're gonna get to that in just a second.
Okay,
What it will let you move past and what it won't. Some documents are required based on the way that you answer the question.
okay,
Okay, but this is just the second page here, and these tooltips, if you're not sure what you need to apply for, then there's a tooltip to explain it. But what most people do is just go down and check everything, and we can determine, we usually figure out, you know, what is needed. And so in the new electronic system, if you check, you know, exception, adoption, but you didn't have any misdemeanors, we would uncheck that, and then the system would send you an email saying, hey, that particular application was closed. So our staff can figure out, you know, on this part, you know, what is needed.
can
And they
you
do a good job
explain
of that.
are the bottom ones for misdemeanor, or
These are the misdemeanor exceptions that we
Okay.
talked about.
Yeah.
You know, Section 8 housing.
Yeah.
People have found it helpful to have a part, and we talked about the truck driver. People are trying to get advanced education sometime. Immigration, there are certain situations, you know, where it can be helpful in an immigration case. But, you know, those are very specific. That's why people usually reach out to us, and we can explain, you know, in detail how to go about, and, you know, whether we can or cannot. And then people attempting to go into law enforcement and needing that's peace officer standard and
but they
training.
have to have a misdemeanor for that one? It can't be a.
Well, if they have like a DUI and they wanna be a police officer.
Oh, okay,
And then they might apply for a pardon that they can submit with their application to that law enforcement agency.
so I do have one question. I'm in school, attempting to get into grad school. Well, I've been, accepted in one, but I'm trying for another, but it is required. What I'm going to school for is to be a professional counselor, and I'm gonna have to be licensed. So would I ask for a pardon for,
If that's their criteria that you have to have the pardon, I don't know that they would not
Yeah.
consider you if you didn't have a pardon.
Okay.
If you feel like it would benefit you to show that you've been fully rehabilitated,
yeah.
you know, but you said you've already gotten accepted into
Well,
one.
yeah, but they didn't ask me anything about my record. I'm just going
Okay.
to school, so I'm concerned that when you get to the end and you're
I would-
preparing for your license,
some
and then you get the
licenses-
shock of the world, you can't get licensed.
It would be
I don't
helpful.
think you can get your license if you have a record, you have to get it.
You have to get a
Okay.
pardon.
Yeah.
So that was my concern. Well, that's good to know. I will select that.
And then you will explain very well in detail
Yes.
that you're going to need that to further your career.
Okay.
You know, and to move in to be able to be eligible for your license.
You know, I got a couple years of school, but I still I better include that just in case, so I don't have that.
Okay. But do you have a felony?
Yes.
Okay, so you could check both and then they'll determine.
So both the two tops and then education.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
Okay, but if you were to get it on the pardon, that kind of supersedes the misdemeanor. And they don't typically list the misdemeanor actually on the pardon order, but if you were to check both, then they would know and document clearly,
Okay,
so that they would know to do that.
that's good to know, cause I did not know about that.
So, these are the different sections of the online application, and what's good about this is you can always see the status of your application. It's not listed on here, just says every section is not started, but you can move around these sections, you know, quickly and in any order that you want to. But you have to complete all of the sections in order to submit the application.
what is the time frame of the application?
You don't have a time frame. You can take as long as you want to actually submit it. Once you submit it, and then we request additional information, we give you now 30 days
That's
to
when the
provide
clock
that
starts.
additional information. If you don't, we close your application out, but then you can just reapply. We're just trying to.
After 2 years.
No, you don't have to wait. You only have to wait 2 years if you applied and you've been denied.
Oh.
Yeah.
So maybe what my question was more like, if I were to say, let's just say I'm still on parole, and I wanted to go, let's say, start an application. No,
No.
just don't even waste my time. Just wait till. I mean, because I could be getting the documentation and stuff
If
prepared.
you're on parole, remember you still gotta complete.
Yeah,
your
I still gotta
sentence
complete that.
And wait 5 years.
Right, but I mean, I would be setting everything up. I wouldn't actually submit.
But it won't be current, and we need
Okay,
current.
I got you.
They
I
might
got you.
change the form by 5.
Yeah, see, well, that's what.
He's not trying to wait.
Well, I mean, you know, I'm being proactive. I guess you could say that's what. But I shouldn't. Okay,
And I can
in this case,
appreciate that he
okay,
has a goal.
Okay, that's
good.
all.
But it's good to know.
Right.
Yes.
Alright, so for the sake of time, I'm just gonna have y'all just hold off on your questions until she gets done with her presentation. That way she
I'm
can,
nearing the end.
okay, that way
Nearing the
she, you
end.
can get through it and they can ask you some more questions then.
We
So
love her.
these-
She always is the same every time she comes. She answers all the questions.
I love coming out, engaging with the community. We're trying to get the information out. You will be surprised how many people don't know.
Yes.
You know, the process to get your rights restored, or what getting your rights restored can do.
I got a quick question then.
Well,
I'll ask you afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, I just said it, I'm like, I got one afterwards.
I need to get my case number and my inmate number. Are they two different numbers? I guess they are two different
You know
numbers.
what? All the agencies have their different number. Department of Corrections has a number, we have a number, Department of Community Supervision has a number. So if you give us a number, we can work with it.
You'll be able, okay, good.
Yes, yes. Okay, so this just shows one particular session and how it breaks out. It's the demographic information, they'll ask you your marriage information. Depending on what you answer here, is going to determine what documents you're going to need at the end. But, you know, you have to answer everything truthfully, because what I didn't discuss is we're gonna send an investigator out. We're gonna assign the case to an investigator. And then the investigator is gonna start their investigation, and then they're gonna come out to visit you at your home. And then they're gonna write a report to the board about your lifestyle. So, you know, they're gonna be verifying all of the information that has been given as well.
Kinda like what FEMA did.
Okay. And these are the documents. So you can see these in red that say required on this particular example. Everything is required, which means that your document will not, you won't be able to complete the submission process. Now, proof of residency, you could upload a blank piece of paper. The system is not gonna know that, but then we're gonna come back and say.
And it's not there, yeah.
We're gonna say, hey, you uploaded a blank piece of paper. You know, we need the actual record, and we're gonna give you 30 days.
Well, I
to get
think that
it, so
helps
that's
a
gonna
great
slow
deal.
down.
I think that helps a great deal, because I didn't realize that when you get to the end, it tells you what you have to.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's much better, and like I said, it's
Okay.
quicker, because for the things that you still need, we can send an email, and you can get that same day, and then you can email the information back to us. Like Lisa was saying, you know, sometimes a snail mail, you send it in, we didn't get it, but you don't even know that we didn't get it. We're waiting and you're waiting
Yeah.
until you pick up the phone, or until we close out your application and you say, hey, I sent that. So, okay. This is very important. Some people are not getting to this step where you have to confirm your application submission. So a lot of people go through all the steps. I don't know what point they get to that they stop, but they're not hitting this button. So it's just out there in cyberspace. We don't have it, you know. So be sure you complete application submission. Okay. That's it. Oh, that's it?
Yes.
Okay,
I
we
got
didn't
you.
do
I was
any
like,
numbers.
okay.
So I was gonna give you all some numbers too. For the last fiscal year, 2024, we only had 845 applications. I think that's because people were transitioning and having problems, and we typically have closer to 1,000. And does anybody wanna guess what our grant rate is?
83%.
Not quite.
I was
but
gonna
it's
say 70.
45? It's better than that.
I was gonna say 70.
I was ready to
70,
get
right
it.
about 75%.
75, yeah.
So
That's
that's,
good.
that's all, all types, that's not one specific.
That's awesome.
That's good.
The majority of our applications are for a pardon with firearms. For some reason, I think people, in the north part of the state do a lot of hunting, and so that might account for that. But, I said that to show that the board is willing. You might not get it on the first time, you might not get it on the second time, but, it's worth the time that it takes to get it in, because it can go so far, to prove that you willing, you've completed, the stringent criteria to get the pardon granted, and that the board had faith in you, as a state agency, that you are rehabilitated, so it can be very worth it.
So can they approve your pardon and say no to firearms?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
But you can
So-
still get a pardon,
You can
just
still
not
get
in
a
that.
pardon, and that happens quite often when people apply for both. That, sometimes people piecemeal it, they try to fill out the board, and they might just apply for civil and political, get granted. A pardon, I didn't say before, if you go straight to the pardon application, pardon is inclusive of civil and political, but not firearms.
Oh,
So they could always, yes, grant the pardon, but not grant the pardon with the firearm. You wait 2 years, you come back, you can reapply for the pardon with the firearm.
Now, can you get a state pardon with a federal conviction?
If you have state felony, but it won't cover the federal conviction.
Okay, but you still can get cleared.
But you
in
can
the state.
still get a pardon on your state, yes. But like we said before, you possibly could get civil and political with firearm rights for the state of Georgia, so. Any more questions?
one, what's
Okay.
some of the things that they will say no to?
I don't.
You
I
don't know
don't,
what
it's
they'll say no to?
discretionary,
Yeah.
just like, with Lisa's side, it's just discretionary, it depends on the person who is voting the case. The board members roll on and off,
Okay.
It might be a particular board member who feels a certain way about a particular thing, that board member may roll off, so it's worth it. You don't know who's voting how, but, you just, like you pray. That's it.
That's
Pray,
all I'ma do
and
is pray.
submit your application.
Yeah, it's gonna be okay.
So, yes.
Say I get a presidential pardon from a federal case. Then will cause I'm from California, then will I have, cause I have a state case that was prior to my federal case, do I have to, get a pardon there as well?
You're living in Georgia with a California felony or a federal.
I have both. I have before I went to federal prison, I was in state prison. So
Okay.
if I get a pardon, cause my plan is to ask Mr. Trump for a pardon,
Okay.
cause right now I'm on
On your
winning streak,
federal
so.
offense.
He said he on a
I'm
win
on a winning
streak.
streak right now, so I'm gonna try to.
You should try. You should try.
Nothing beats a
And
try,
so
but
that's
failure.
That's one of my plans, but then I'm reminded of, a case before my federal case, which was I was in juvenile, but I was tried as an adult, and I was convicted in adult court for that
Okay.
case.
So in Georgia, apply for restoration of civil and political on that. If you wanted
For the
to
California
possess
state
firearm,
one.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Worth the shot.
Any more
I'll shoot
questions?
my shot.
Shoot your shot.
Well, thank you for having us again. We always
Love
enjoy
y'all.
it.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much for being